Hello, everybody, and welcome to Breakdown. My name is Jeremy, and I will be your guide to the deck for this evening. Today we've got Mono Red Devotion, featuring some really great cards, actually. We are playing 3 Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, really puts our deck over the top, especially in Game 1. And the rest of our lands are all just snow-covered mountains, and we'll get to that in a second. Next up, we've got our 1-drop slot. We're just going to go through this by mana cost with our Goblin Guides. We've got just a playset of those, gets in damage real fast, gets us an early game lead. Playset of Lightning Bolt, because if you're playing red and you're not playing a playset of bolts, well, I don't know what you're doing. Next up, we've got another playset of Scred, which is going to be our major removal spell for the larger creatures, also very undercosted, often enough does as well as Roast, but also hits creatures with flying, with how many snow-covered mountains we get out all the time. Next up, we've got Scar Mage, which is absolutely fantastic, prowess 1-2, and if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to a creature an opponent controls, put that many -1/-1 counters on that creature instead. This is probably our best 1-drop, which I somewhat hesitate to say, but at the same time it is really true. If you get this down turn 1, you can really hit your opponent hard. The -1/-1 counters from things like Scred, Lightning Bolt, later on we'll get to Boros Reckoner, and it just ends up being absolutely crazy with some of our other cards. We have enough instants and sorceries where it really does make a huge difference. In our 2-drop slot, we've got a playset of Ash Zealot, which may seem like a really weird thing to pull up, but I would like to note that it is both First Strike and Haste, and really the ability that it comes along with is the reason we're playing it, which is whenever a player casts a spell from a graveyard, it deals 3 damage to that player. So with all the graveyard decks rotating through Modern, things like that, especially when you're talking about Snapcaster with Flashback and stuff like that, we definitely want something that's going to be able to just Game 1 start countering that kind of stuff. Next up, we've got Corgan Dragonlord, which is kind of a mana sink for us. We have a few of those in this deck, not a ton, but enough that it makes a huge difference when we get to Nykthos. The Dragonlord is a leveler. It goes from a 2/2 up to an 8/8, depending on how much mana you pour into it with flying, so sometimes that puts us over the top and just wins us the game. Flying and trample, by the way, plus fire breathing, so it actually gets very good very soon. Next one is Stigma Lasher. This is kind of my pet card. It is a 2/2 with Weather, and whenever it deals damage to a player, that player can't gain life for the rest of the game. I will say that this is probably the first creature that gets blocked every single time, because everybody hates the idea of not being able to gain life for the rest of the game off of, be it lands or an actual effect that they've got going on. It's just a really great all-around card. Goblin Chain Whirler, because if you're playing Devotion and not Goblin Chain Whirler, it just does some amazing things, especially, and we will come back to this again, Scar Mage, because it just group -1/-1 counters on everything your opponents control. Does a great job of removing small blockers, like Lingering Souls, stuff like that. Boggart Ram Gang is just to fill out our 3-drop spot. It is a 3/3 with Haste and Wither. Does a really great job of just getting in for a little bit of extra damage. We often pull it out in Game 2 for something different. It just depends on what our opponent's playing. People really hate blocking that because Wither is just an amazing effect, really just dials down your opponents. We have a ton of -1/-1 counters going on stuff from Scar Mage, Stigma Lasher, and also Boggart Ram Gang. Next, we've got Boros Reckoner, which is another just amazing card. 3/3 for 3. Whenever it's dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any target, which, again, comboing with Scar Mage. We can pay a red in order to give it first strike until end of turn. Often enough, this is a great interaction with our deck. We can do something like, if our opponent has decided that they can't be targeted or something this turn, the nice thing is that eventually, and I guess this doesn't really apply with can't be targeted, so things like Leyline of Sanctity kind of mess with us. But we can Scred our Boros Reckoner if we really have to, in order to get damage through, because Scred only deals damage to creatures. So if we Scred our own Boros Reckoner, we deal damage to their face. We can deal like the last 5 damage for 1 mana, which is great. And the last slot we've got is for Bane Fire. Now, Bane Fire is kind of a arguable inclusion here. I would say that it's worth your time in game one, and if you're going against more control-oriented decks, likely they'll bring in something like Leyline of Sanctity. Bane Fire does not get around that, sadly. I found that out the hard way. But our Nykthos can really pump this up, especially if our opponent's leaving our board alone. Because if X is 5 or more, spell can't be countered, damage can't be prevented. So X damage to any target, we can often enough get this in for 5 or 6 damage without too much issue. In our sideboard, we have 3 Abrades, a little bit of Artifact hate, a little bit of Creature hate, still does really well with Scar Mage. We've got Roast, again, large creature removal, stuff like that. That probably could be removed, in all honesty. Next up, we've got Hijack, kind of get that opponent's huge 10-10 Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, bring it over to our side for a turn, get in. Really does a good job at just getting rid of those large creatures if we really need that to happen. Sweltering Suns, I'm kind of iffy about. I'm still working on that one, but we don't know exactly what's going to go on here. Goblin Chain Whirler, 4th copy in sideboard, does the same thing as the other ones. 2 Nile Spell Bombs. If I were to have the choice, I probably would replace that with Relic of Progenitus. I think it would do a better job for what we're trying to do here. Haven't gotten that far in Magic Online yet, so support me. Gonna end up on Patreon pretty soon here. And then 3 of Damping Sphere for our Tron matchups, our Storm matchups, anything that's really trying to cast multiple spells in a turn. So even Control has a hard time dealing with something like Damping Sphere. I sometimes bring it in and stuff like that. It does come back to bite us every so often. It does disable Nykthos, which is kind of a pain. So optional inclusions in the near future. Still working on some of this, but I think that if we go more toward the Skred direction, bring in like Chandra Torch of Defiance, or can bring in stuff like Leyline of the Void is another good one we could use instead of Relic of Progenitus if we really wanted to. I think we've got enough creature removal where we don't have to worry about that too much. Might bring in Dismember, that's another good option. Just because we can get in for some quick damage, get rid of that Grimag Angler really quickly, and we don't have to have Skred all the way built up to 5 yet. Other than that, if you have any comments, questions, whatever, go ahead and put them in the comments section. Happy to answer them. And we will talk to you soon for the gameplay.